The station smelled of coal smoke and rain-soaked dust, that scent of endings and beginnings that never quite decide which they are. The 3:15 to Abilene groaned, hissed and sighed its way down the track, leaving behind a woman in a travel-worn wedding dress and eyes that looked like they had already said goodbye too many times. Clara Mayfield stood with her gloved hands folded around the handle of a small trunk, the kind with brass corners and faded initials. Her veil had slipped loose in the wind, a whisper of white tangled in her hair. Across the platform, the man she had come all this way to marry, Mr. Lowell, was already turning his back, his hat brim low, his jaw tight with embarrassment. "You misled me," he muttered, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Your letters made you sound younger." Clara said nothing. She had no fight left in her, only the sound of the train whistle stretching across the empty fields like something dying slow. She wanted to tell him she'd been honest about everything, about her age, her freckles, her simple dreams, but men like him never looked long enough to see truth. They saw only what disappointed them. The conductor called, "All aboard," and Mr. Lowell climbed the steps without another word. Steam billowed, swallowing him up. The train jolted forward, and the echo of his boots faded down the tracks. People on the platform tried not to stare, but they did. Mrs. Abernathy, the station-keeper's wife, whispered to a friend, "Poor thing. Left right here before the vows. Imagine the shame." Clara didn't cry. She merely set her trunk down on the bench, folded her veil neatly, and tucked it inside. The lace brushed against her wrist like a ghost of something that could have been. The rain began, soft at first, then harder, the kind that soaks through pride as much as cloth. She didn't move. Across the tracks, a man in a brown duster coat watched. Elias Thorne had come into town for feed, nails, and solitude. He had not planned to witness heartbreak unfold in the open like this. He saw the way she stood, not in weakness but in quiet ruin, and something in him, long locked away, stirred. He had known loss, too. 2 years since the fever took his wife, and left him with 2 children, and a silence in the house so deep it felt like judgment. He'd learned to work around it, the mending, the cooking, the long rides, but nothing filled that empty chair at the table. Now he saw this woman, drenched and still, the train shrinking into distance, and he thought of his own loneliness like a wound that had learned to live. He walked over, hat in hand. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you'll catch cold standing out here." She blinked up at him, eyes clear despite the rain. "There's nowhere else to go." "Then at least take my coat," he said, holding it out. Her pride hesitated, then crumbled beneath the shiver running through her. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling it around her shoulders. It was too big, smelling faintly of hay and cedar smoke. "You can sit under the overhang," he said, nodding toward the freight platform. "Not much, but it's dry." So she followed him there, and they sat in silence, the rain drumming steady on the roof, his horse shifting its weight, the world small and still for a moment. She didn't speak. He didn't pry. But in the hush between them, something human and fragile flickered to life. Inside the station, Mrs. Abernathy clucked her tongue. "You ought to come in and warm yourself, dear. Tea's on." Clara obeyed, her steps slow, the wooden floor creaking beneath damp skirts. Mrs. Abernathy poured tea and whispered as she always did, half judging, half kind. "Men don't like trouble, you know. They want easy smiles and soft talk. You'll find your footing again, I'm sure." Clara smiled faintly, though it never reached her eyes. "I'm not sure there's much of me left to find." Her gaze drifted to the doorway, where Elias Thorne stood waiting out the storm. He was talking to his horse, murmuring something low and kind, the way one talks to a creature they understand better than people. His shoulders were broad, the kind that bore things quietly. When the rain slowed, she stepped outside again. "Thank you for the coat," she said, handing it back. He shook his head. "Keep it. Looks better on you anyway." That startled a laugh from her, a quiet one, but real. The sound surprised them both. He nodded toward the road. "I live a ways out. Dry Hollow Ranch. Got 2 young ones who could use a woman's sense in the house. Their ma's been gone 2 winters now." She looked up sharply, uncertain what he meant. He hesitated, then spoke the words as if pulling them from a place of deep need. "Miss, please come with me." "My twins need a mother like you." The words hung there, warm and strange and almost impossible. She studied him, his weathered face, the humility in his eyes, the way he didn't look at her like she was a burden or a rumor. "Just a person." Maybe that was enough. "You don't know me," she said softly. He nodded. "No, ma'am, but I reckon I know what kindness looks like when I see it." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She had come across miles for a promise that dissolved in smoke, and here, a stranger was offering something simpler: respect, purpose, maybe even a beginning. Clara looked down at her trunk, then at the fading tracks. The rain had washed them clean, as though the world was asking her to start again. She picked up the trunk and stepped toward him. "All right," she said, voice trembling but sure. He took the handle to help her, and for a heartbeat their hands brushed. Just that, a brief warmth in the cold afternoon. Mrs. Abernathy watched from the doorway, eyes wide, then softened. "God bless them both," she whispered. As the two figures walked down the muddy road together, one in a too-big coat, the other leading the horse, the clouds broke, and a narrow beam of light spilled through. The train was gone, the gossip fading, the platform empty. But in that slant of golden light, the story was only just beginning. And though neither of them knew it, what started as mercy would soon grow roots deep enough to hold them both through every storm the prairie could bring. The road to Dry Hollow was long and hushed, lined with sagebrush that shimmered silver under the wet sky. The wheels of Elias's wagon whispered through the mud while Clara sat beside him, her trunk at her feet, the wind brushing her cheeks dry. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. The rhythm of the horse's hooves felt like a steady heartbeat, a promise of moving forward. By dusk, they reached the ranch, a modest house framed by cottonwoods and weathered fences. Smoke rose from the chimney like a sigh. The air smelled of earth and pine, of something sturdy and real. Two children waited on the porch, twins with wide gray eyes. Amos clutched a wooden horse with its tail broken off, and Ruthie, her hair in messy braids, stood half behind him, wary but curious. Elias lifted the girl from the wagon. "This here's Miss Clara. She's gonna help us for a while," he said, his voice careful. Clara knelt so she was eye level with the twins. "Hello, Amos. Hello, Ruthie," she said softly. "Your pa's been kind to me. I'll try to be the same to you." The children studied her, unsure but not unkind. Ruthie whispered, "Are you scared of horses?" Clara smiled faintly. "Only the ones that bite." The girl's lips twitched, and just like that, a small thread of trust wove itself between them. Inside, the house smelled faintly of old wood, coffee, and the loneliness that lingers where laughter used to live. The dishes were mismatched, curtains faded, and a woman's shawl still hung on a peg by the door, dust softening its edges. Clara touched it gently, as one touches a memory. "You kept her things," she murmured. Elias nodded once. "Couldn't bring myself to throw them out. Maybe it's time." She didn't answer. But that night, after the children were asleep, she washed the dishes by lamplight. The flicker cast warm shapes on the walls, shadows that almost looked like a family again. Elias watched from the porch, pipe forgotten in his hand. The house, for the first time in years, felt alive. Days turned into weeks. The twins began to laugh more, the house brightened, and even the wind seemed softer. Clara mended curtains, planted herbs in the windowsill, and taught Ruthie to sew crooked stitches on scraps of linen. Amos followed Elias around the barn, but when he fell and scraped his knee, it was Clara he ran to. "You'll be fine," she said, washing the cut and blowing on it gently. Her voice was calm, her hands steady. The boy stared at her with new eyes, as though seeing what home might mean. When Elias came in from the field that evening, he found the twins asleep by the fire. Clara reading aloud from a small book, her voice quiet and low. He stood in the doorway, not wanting to break the spell. "You can sit if you like," she said without looking up. He did. The silence between them was companionable now. Outside, the night hummed with crickets, the fire crackled, and something invisible and tender bloomed in the room, the fragile warmth of belonging. But the world, even kind moments, always tests what it gives. When Clara went to town one morning for sugar and cloth, whispers followed her. "That's the one who got left," someone muttered near the general store. "Heard she moved right in with Thorne, didn't even wait." Clara kept her chin high, but her hands shook as she paid. She heard laughter behind her, the cruel kind that sticks to your skin. Later that day, Elias rode into town and heard the same words. He stood in the saloon doorway, the air thick with tobacco and heat. Mr. Lowell sat at a card table bragging loud. "That woman's fooling that widower into keeping her. Some folks don't know when they're not wanted." Elias's jaw clenched, but his voice was calm. "You left a good woman standing in the rain, Lowell." "That's all folks'll remember," Lowell sneered, half rising. "And what are you, her savior?" Elias didn't take the bait. He looked him straight in the eye, said, "No, just a man who knows decency when he sees it," and turned his back. His silence carried more weight than fists ever could. When he came home, Clara was at the table, mending Amos's torn shirt. "They're talking," she said quietly, not looking up. "I know," he replied, hanging up his hat. "Let them. Truth's quieter, but it lasts longer." Her needle paused. "You didn't have to defend me." "Maybe I did," he said. "You were the only one who didn't run from the storm." Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Only bent her head and kept sewing, though her hands trembled now for a different reason. That night, thunder rolled across the hills. The twins woke crying. Clara went to them, wrapping them in a quilt, humming a lullaby she barely remembered. The song wove through the sound of rain until the children's breathing steadied. Elias watched from the doorway, candlelight trembling on his face. The sight of her, gentle, steadfast, holding what mattered most to him, did something to his heart he hadn't thought possible anymore. When the storm passed, he helped her latch the shutters. Their hands brushed, lingering just a heartbeat too long. "You don't have to keep fixing everything," she whispered. "Maybe I like seeing things whole again," he said. They stood there, rain dripping from the eaves, both of them too tired to hide what they felt anymore. Spring came slow to Dry Hollow. The grass grew high, the air smelled of clover, and Clara's laughter, rare and light, began to weave itself through the days. She taught the twins to bake biscuits and fed the orphaned calf that followed her around like a shadow. Elias noticed the color back in her cheeks, the way the sun turned her hair to honey. He began to wonder if kindness could turn to love, and if love, quiet and earned, could still find two people who had given up on it. One evening, while the wind carried the scent of wildflowers, he found her in the yard hanging laundry. The sheets fluttered pale against the gold horizon. The twins chased each other, their laughter spilling through the grass. He stopped a few feet away, hat in hand. "You've made this place home," he said softly. She smiled without turning. "It's the first place that's let me stay." He took a slow breath, voice rough with things unsaid. "I asked you to come for the twins' sake. Didn't know you'd heal me too." The wind caught her skirt, and she turned to him. Eyes bright and wet. "Elias," she whispered. He stepped closer, close enough for the scent of soap and lilac to fill the air between them. "Stay," he said, his voice trembling just enough to make it true. "For good this time." Clara's lips parted, then curved into something fragile and full of grace. "I already have." He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and in that simple touch, no grand vows, no promises, they sealed a life quietly built on mercy. The twins came running then, throwing their arms around both of them, the four of them laughing under a sky so wide it could have swallowed every sorrow they'd ever known. Years later, folks still told the story differently. Some said he rescued her, others said she saved him. But those who'd been there, who'd seen the way they looked at each other, said it was simpler than that. On the porch of Dry Hollow Ranch, an older Clara rocked in a chair, hair streaked with silver. The twins, grown now, strong and kind, worked the fields while Elias sat beside her, silent as ever, his hand resting over hers. The sun sank slow behind the hills, setting the world on fire one last time before dusk, and in that gentle glow, the narrator's voice came like wind through wheat. In a land where loneliness rode every trail, two lost souls found each other not through vows or thunder, but through quiet acts of grace. The town forgot its gossip soon enough, but the children never forgot the woman who smelled like spring and stayed. A pause, soft as breath. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive dressed in roses or ceremony. Sometimes it just looks you in the eye, in the rain, and says, "Please come with me." The rocking chair creaked, the fields shimmered gold, and the wind carried the rest of their story into the silence that love leaves behind when it's finally at peace.